So, Jason, you just came off stage and you were talking on a panel about energy infrastructure, but in particular, how energy infrastructure needs to evolve to meet the growing demand from AI. Now, you're the CEO of FrontierGen. I'd like to first hear a little bit more about FrontierGen and what it does, and then I want to talk a little bit more about those takeaways from that conversation.
Sure. So FrontierGen, we're an industrial site developer focused on data centers. And so we're focused on Texas. So we've found two larger scale 1,000-acre locations where we believe megawatts, molecules, and megabits all converge. And so we spent a lot of time on geospatial data to locate those, and that's similar to some of how I've approached things throughout my entire career. I've been an infrastructure developer here in Texas now for about 15 years, and data is a big driver, especially when things are changing very fast.
Well, I want to come back to a little bit about infrastructure development and how this may be similar or different, but first off, in terms of if the audience comes away with one takeaway, obviously it was a long and really interesting discussion, but what do you want someone who listened to that discussion to walk out of here today and say, okay, this is what stuck with me?
Well, I think we opened up the conversation saying that, what is AI? AI is converting man-hours to megawatt-hours on a massive scale, on an industrial scale. And as a consequence, you've got massive investments from these tech companies in particular that are being dedicated towards it. So on the order of not billions of dollars, but hundreds of billions and now trillions of dollars. So those investments will either be very, very successful or they will not be very successful. Either way, this is one of the biggest stories of the next decade for our economy. Because if they're very successful, almost regardless, actually, they're going to impact the energy markets in a big way for the United States. And where they're located, where they can be located, is going to have an enormous impact on the development of the region and the grids and the pipeline infrastructure that supports it. So that to me is going to be one of the biggest takeaways is understanding that and how it's going to impact our energy industry.
And what didn't you get a chance to touch on? I mean, in a panel, you always run short of time for something. What is it you maybe would have liked to have a little bit more time to address?
Well, the reimagination of the industrial industry, I think is something that I believe is going to be one of the big themes for our future. We talked about it a little on stage. We didn't get as much into it, but historically speaking, if you're a large industrial developer like what we've done over the years, you are connecting to the grid and you're putting through an interconnection agreement, and you're just expecting that you're going to get the megawatts in a period of time, and that's that's it.
Flip the switch and it arrives.
Yeah, flip the switch and it arrives. If we live in a world now where the grids are constrained, where if the recent McKinsey study is correct, and we're going to be adding France, or even a version of France, to our grid by 2030. If it's true that data centers are going to increase the demand, their share of the electricity demand in the U.S. moves from 3% to 12%. If any version of that is true, grids are going to be pretty constrained. And that's going to impact power prices. That's going to impact where you can locate stuff. Mm-hmm. But it also impacts, if you're an industrial developer, how you interact, big picture, with the grid and with regulators, because you have to do more to understand how that impacts things upstream, and how you develop around yourself, and actually where you're located.
So I want to talk about those impacts. I mean, oftentimes AI is seen, or is the rhetoric around it is it's this strain on the grid. It's demanding more. But you brought up something on stage that I was really interested in, and that's around the ability for these data centers to actually augment the grid, to have better stability. So tell me what that type of data center looks like.
Sure. I think, so SB, even to take a step back from there.
Sure.
So Texas passed something known as SB6. And I believe that every grid in the United States is going to take on something similar that's going to put more responsibility on the industrial developers to do more. And so one of the things that it encourages industrial developers to do is not just take responsibility for the transmission upstream, but also give some preference to bringing your own power as well, in terms of being able to make that generation support for the grid. And so what that translates into is if there is a grid event where there's strain on the grid.
So a cold snap, we see in Houston quite often, once a winter probably.
A cold snap or a winter storm Uri sort of event.
Yeah.
ERCOT could come back to you as a data center or industrial developer if you have generation and say, hey, I'm curtailing you first or amongst the first, but I'm going to ask you to run on your own generation or dispatch your own generation into the grid to support the grid. That's not something that has happened in the past, but when we move into a world where industrial players, not just data center developers, but industrial players are requesting, 100, 200, 500 megawatts of load and capacity, there's more responsibility, or there could be more responsibility on them to do more to be supportive of the grid as well. And this is one way they can do it. And so it's supportive not just from the standpoint of grid support, but I also think that there is a potential to co-locate with these industrial facilities, other industrial facilities too, that are supportive to a broader picture. So historically, for example, data centers have been concentrated in highly populated city regions. Of course, Northern Virginia is a center of gravity for data centers. And it's been that way dating back to AOL and the 90s. But the question is, building these data centers and these new energy loads, these industrial loads that require a city's worth of resources in a city, is that sustainable? Is that can that carry the day moving forward, or would folks be better served to locate them in areas that are far away from the cities, where the actual molecules and the megawatts are actually located, to be able to support development there and support other industries there as well from a job perspective? I think all those are real possibilities.
Okay, and so I was going to ask, is this happening? I mean, it's one thing to say, we can build a better data center, but are companies building better data centers that then can actually be grid supportive? I would think there's got to be some additional costs there as well, right?
To develop the generation and the
those types of things.
Yeah. I mean, so clearly to build generation, backup generation or primary generation supporting a facility there are costs. But from a transmission perspective, so from an interconnection perspective, ERCOT and mini grids go through a process of interconnection, and your load, your strain on the grid impacts the grid. It impacts the transmission system in a certain way. So there is a study that you do, and in this case ERCOT would do, to understand what the impacts are on all of the transmission infrastructure supporting your particular location. And depending on your stress on those, you could be required to support through a letter of credit or other means some further development or some enhancement to that transmission infrastructure. And SB6 helps encourage that to be very much the case, whereby if you are a large load stressing the grid along important corridors, there's more responsibility there as well. So your financial responsibility to these are both what you're putting on your site, but also the infrastructure that's supporting your site as well.
So companies are going to have to build this, you think, into their business plans as things like SB6 advance, essentially?
I believe it's critical. So I think everything that we knew about data center development or industrial development from the past starting out to how we start, going back to where we started this conversation, if AI is a thing, if data centers are a thing, if these investments are going to result in strain to the grid, industrial developers who are demanding large loads are going to have to take more ownership in understanding what the implications are. So it's no longer enough just to connect. You have to understand all the implications upstream and actually do more work upstream, not just financially, but from a due diligence perspective and from the standpoint of working with the community to make sure that you're interacting with it in a way that's responsible.
Well, Jason, thank you. It's been a really great conversation. I'm really happy you could join us here on the Debrief, and I hope to talk to you again at the summit next year.
You bet. Happy to do it.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.